What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota, Danny Abdel-Jabbar. What's up, man? How are you?
Chill, man. As per usual. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. I guess we'll just address the elephant in the room immediately because I don't think anyone can really stop talking about the debates that transpired a couple days ago. We actually watched those together.
Yep. We broke social distance laws and sat down on a couch about 6 feet apart and drank some beers and reveled in the awesomeness that was that performance.
Yeah, well, it sure was something. It was it was something.
It was something very interesting.
It was indeed an incredibly interesting moment in American history. If you just look back at past debates and compare, going back to like Gore and Bush or just any other fucking presidency, man, debates have changed a lot. Now they're just shit shows.
I think they can hardly be called a debate.
Yeah,
at this
I wouldn't.
point.
I don't think that really could be called a debate. It was more of just like an argument.
Like two old men like yelling at each other.
Two old men arguing each other over a fucking like debt or something. Like that's what it sounded like. You owed me money since 1974.
with like one other old guy instigating the fight in the background.
Mike Wallace? No.
Chris Wallace. Chris Wallace.
Yeah. Excuse Chris Wallace. Well, Mike Wallace's father. Chris Wallace did a terrible job here.
He wasn't moderating. He was just like
moderating
there.
The debate of all time.
Yeah, and what's funny too is because like it's something that you and I talked about before the thing, and then like I for the most part agreed. Out of the number of moderators that we've seen, Chris Wallace is one of the better ones for normal debates. But this was not a normal debate. He did a really really fucking poor job in general. But I was happy that he didn't totally toe the Fox News line, and he did call out Trump for interrupting too many times.
Do you know who Chris Wallace is? He's a lifelong Democrat. He's very establishment.
I know, but he's employed by Fox News, so
he's employed by
he
Fox.
Who holds the goal makes the rules.
I think people on the left have this like because of Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity.
Oh no, it's exclusively because of Hannity, and before Hannity, it was Bill O'Reilly.
Right.
So there's good reason to believe that Fox News is fucked up.
But prior to it, if you take those personalities outside of Fox, then Fox is pretty just run of the mill type of establishment news during the daytime. It's just their
that Fox and Friends program ain't very good either.
Pundits.
Oh yeah, no, don't get me wrong. Yeah, I don't consider them journalists, much like I don't consider fucking Rachel Maddow or any of the other Lawrence O'Donnell types on MSNBC. The same way. Yeah, like stop the hammering. No, like I hold them all to the same disregard. But at the very least, you have to understand where their leanings are and where their corporate overlords decide that they're going to pull the programming. And I was a little bit worried, to bring it back to Chris Wallace, that he was just going to let him do whatever he wanted, because pretty much right off the bat, from jump, Trump was already, being annoying, and like talking over Biden and talking over fucking Chris Wallace, the moderator, which is super weird. It was just like childish and disrespectful and just annoying, honestly, because you couldn't really hear what was going on. And I thought he was just going to let him do it. And halfway through, he actually finally got the balls to say something. Obviously, it didn't make a difference. But I was like really interested because I saw on Reddit today just like how many times did they interrupt each other. And it was the most reliable source I saw was 128 times Trump cut into Biden's time. And the most reliable source I saw for Biden was 33. And obviously there's a big disparity between those two numbers. But I think it's something like every 2.5 minutes Trump was saying something, which in over a 90-minute time scale is pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, it was nuts. It was not only just annoying to listen to at times because of all of the interruptions, but it was also like grossly just incorrect. Like there was falsehoods being said, frankly, on both sides. A little more on Trump's side, to be honest, but they were both lying a lot, and they were also just yelling at each other a lot. So I don't think anyone's any smarter for it. I don't think anyone who was undecided now has a more firm understanding of who they want to vote for, and I don't think they changed anybody's minds either. What do you think?
Mr. Madison, what you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. You had the video of that, don't you?
Yeah, let's pull it up.
Mr. Madison, what you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Okay, a simple wrong would have done just fine, but
you remain one.
I award you no points.
May God have mercy on your soul. I guess my initial take on this, and I hate playing like this game of like analyzing the fucking debate, because everyone is like, oh, I'm going to analyze the debate, but I guess we're kind of forced to do it since we have a show. But I don't know. I felt like it was just kind of like a trench warfare. We were talking about this after the show. Like, I don't think anyone really changed their minds.
No.
I don't really think this really pushed a narrative out there. Both sides got their talking points out that they wanted to push out. Both sides have their media backers pushing those narratives. I think that overall, I think it ended up being a win for Joe Biden, mainly because the bar that was set for Joe Biden was so low. It was to the point where I think a lot of people on the right were expecting him to crap his pants and drool, and not be able to mentally or physically make it out of the debate without having a catastrophic meltdown.
Yeah,
he didn't have a catastrophic meltdown. He seemed just as fine as he did in his other debates, which weren't good, but it just wasn't to the point where it wasn't like a plane crash.
Yeah, he wasn't dying on stage.
He passed that low bar,
yeah.
And it immediately had him pass. He passed all those expectations. And then the other thing with Trump, I think he may have turned off a demographic that he may need, and I think that's white suburban women might be turned off by how kind of vicious some of his attacks were, especially towards the end on the Hunter Biden stuff. I am fine with criticizing Hunter Biden for the nepotism and all the corrupt, shady stuff. I think it's warranted, but when I went to the drug stuff, I think Biden actually handled that pretty well with his response about saying, yeah, he had a drug problem and he conquered it. But other than that, just stupid from both sides. I'm glad this debate happened because you can kind of just unmask our political system and look at it as the absurd system that it really is.
Yep.
Instead of having like these presentable kind of messengers of both sides speaking in a respectful manner. Like, this is just this is the government. It's an ugly system, and it just takes these kind of ugly personalities to get that in the head of people. So in that way, I think you could look at it as a successful endeavor that took place.
That's a dark way
no
to
one
look
will
at
ever
it.
look the federal government in the same esteem that they used to. And I think that's a very good thing for the future of America.
This is crazy because it's this is enshrined in history now, like for better or for worse.
He's not presidential.
This is a piece of history now, for better or for worse. This is like, there are a lot of debates that, when presidential historians look at, how the presidents did, they look at their debates, especially since we started televising them. This one's going to go down as one of the more interesting ones for sure.
It's definitely going to go down as some of the more interesting things. I'm trying to think of advantages that Trump could theoretically have from this debate.
Well, the obvious ones, the ones where, I'm already hearing the talking points about like, oh, Trump won because he beat up on Biden, and Biden was not strong enough that, he couldn't get a word in edgewise,
That seems to be the main narrative, that Trump just bullied his beta ass. Like,
it's like
narrative is coming out like, what an alpha.
Ben Shapiro, Rex, liberal Biden, like one of like, it's fucking. No, I know. I'm just saying
about it too.
I'm just saying.
See, but I don't revere. See, I'm looking at it in like a cynical way where I'm just like, well, this is government. Why don't we just have? I love looking at governments outside the country, like in Turkey when there was that big brawl in their parliament.
They literally had a fist fight. Yeah,
they literally had a huge fist fight over. What were they fighting over? They were fighting over Idlib, having troops in there and like escalating tensions with Russia. No, it wasn't in Idlib. It was in Egypt that they were fighting over. I forget, because they're in Turkey, as we'll probably talk later today, is involved in so many other countries that's not inside their borders.
Right.
But they were having a fist fight, and I kind of like those moments where people can collectively look at government and be like, this is really dumb. And there are really dumb people who are involved in the system. I'm kind of a Ron Swanson in that regard.
Yeah, I hear that.
I'm looking at it in the Ron Swanson light.
I mean, looking at these situations, it really makes me, kind of give more credit to Ronald Reagan when he said that government, isn't the solution. It's the problem. Of course, that line will also come up in today's debate, not debate, but episode for different reasons. But it definitely sounds like he was onto something.
I'm trying to think of a scenario of where Trump comes out ahead on this. I can't really think of one, but then again, I couldn't think of a scenario that he was going to win the election, and he did win.
Right.
So there could very well be like a lot of people who are like, you know what? I think honestly what's going to end up happening is the response. What will invigorate his base to actually vote will be the response from the media's response to the debate. Like Republicans and conservatives or people on the right will see the media's coverage of it, and even if they were like, what the fuck is this debate? This is an unmitigated disaster. What is Trump saying right now? They're going to look at the media's coverage and they're going to be like, fuck the media, I'm back with Trump. I think that's what's going to happen.
It's possible.
I think that's like if you're on the right, what you're probably looking for. But otherwise, I don't really have anything else to say about it other than it was basically a complete ridiculous event.
Yeah, and I don't even you could probably go find 1,000 other shows that will go into extreme detail about every single line that was said and every interruption, every lie, every little bit of information from it. This isn't going to be that kind of show. Like we're gonna talk about some different stuff, but that's related for presidential politics, and that's the October surprise, which I'm sure many people have heard the phrase before, but probably not a whole lot of people understand where it comes from. So yeah, that's going to be the topic for today. We're gonna leave this debate alone.
Everyone is talking about the October surprise. What's going to be the October surprise?
Right.
I guess if you're not familiar with the term, I'm sure most of you are. It was coined by William Casey, Ronald Reagan's campaign manager in the 1980s. He was also the CIA director, and it's basically an unlikely event that is timed to influence an election. So everyone was saying that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was kind of like the early October surprise, the fact that she passed away. And everyone's kind of like searching and looking for, what is going to be that major breaking news event that's going to persuade voters to either vote for Trump or vote for Biden. Some are already saying that the tax relief stuff will be that. I don't really think it is. Honestly, I think at this point, our news cycle is moving so quickly that things are absorbed and forgotten
in a matter of seconds.
So it's really hard to have something stick for that long.
Well, so what were like some examples that stuck? Like, what were some October surprises that actually like happened?
I don't know. It's hard to tell what stuck because, I mean, we don't really. I've never looked at like the polling data and stuff like that.
Which, as we know from 2016, can be skewed. But
I mean, there are polling. There are legitimate studies on these things, and I mean, I was a political science major in college, and what made me hate that major was doing that type of like work, like the polling data. The Bin Laden videos in 2004. So when he was running for re-election, there was like a Bin Laden video that came out where he was like, "Death to America, I did 9/11," and everyone's like, "Oh, Bush, we need you. Bush, save us.
Save us from the bearded man in the cave."
Yeah, save us from that bearded bad man in the cave.
Yeah.
So I think that was that was something that people would consider an October surprise. There was the market crash in 2008 when McCain was running. Then there was, I mean, I don't think that shouldn't have been an unlikely event, that's just the crash that was due to happen.
Right, but I think what it did was probably put the thought in a lot of American voters that, Republican policy wasn't good for the economy.
Well, I think Obama was going to win that no matter what.
Yeah, but I think it definitely helped, at least some people.
Yeah, probably. Then there was the, I guess recent examples would be the grab 'em by the pussy.
Yeah, that didn't really pan out too well, though, did it?
that didn't really stick.
No.
But then there was James Comey's letter to Congress that he would investigate more emails from Hillary Clinton's private server.
See, that one probably had an impact.
that one may have had an impact, a bigger impact than other, definitely than the P tapes.
PP tapes.
Not the P tapes. I'm getting things. There's so many.
PP tapes.
There's so many stupid fucking scandals with
but
Trump.
You're right, and here's the thing about it. It's not that they're all stupid scandals. They're all scandals in and of themselves. It's just the way that the media, and specifically like the left, are trying to put these issues, some of them very legitimate, in the fore, makes it like they're reaching for something to be the October surprise, but they've just been doing it for the last 4 years, right? And so, no matter what you look at, whether it's, the grab 'em by the pussy, whether it's, fucking the Ukrainian tapes, whether it's the PP tapes, the very perfect call. I mean, you name it, there's always been something that by itself is probably legitimate enough to like raise some eyebrows, but the way that, the Democrats and parts of the media are spinning it make it feel like, oh, this is it. This is the nail in Trump's coffin. Like this is the October surprise. But the funny part about the
we
got him. The funny part about the October surprise, however, is not that the surprise worked. It's that the surprise didn't work. And that's kind of part of the history of it.
Well, here's the one thing I was going to say that Trump said correctly in that debate. When they asked him about transitioning power, he said there was never a power transition. And I think that was really interesting that he said it that way. Like, there was never a peaceful transition of power. Like, look what happened to me. Like, the entire establishment was out to get me, and then I had enemies in the intelligence agencies as soon as I became president. Like, what peaceful transition? Like, there was a ridiculous scandal about me colluding with Russia to win the election, and even those tax returns that just came out that was supposed to be an October surprise had it stated that there was no evidence that Trump had any business dealings with Russia, besides like that dumb Moscow thing with like the not Victoria's Secrets, the Miss Universe thing. So I understand his point. Like, there really wasn't a transition of power from the establishment into his hands.
Well, I mean, I hear that point, but I think the questions are framed differently. What he's saying, he was bullied by the media and like he made some enemies in the fucking CIA. Like, nobody. I think what the question is framed around is whether or not he will leave office, and I think he's conflating him getting bullied by the media with a more grievous issue, which would be him not leaving office. So while I somewhat agree with what you said, I think generally speaking, he's trying to downplay one thing, his thing, and upplay another, or like equalize them in a way that I don't think makes sense.
Well, let's get into like some ones in the past, because I'm sure we can debate and stick on this for hours.
For sure.
Let's go back. I want to start out with some. I think what's interesting is when there's there's high evidence of like treason that's involved in these cases to influence elections.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look back in history, man, there are some shady things that have gone on with presidential elections.
Oh yeah.
And one that grabs your immediate attention
by the pussy.
Hey. Hey. This is not the locker room at the cross.
Coming to you live from the locker room.
So one example back in the 60s was the Nixon and Hubert Humphreys election in 1968. So back then there was a war going on in Vietnam, which was a complete disaster. By 1968, I think approximately 30,000 soldiers have already been killed, not to mention all the countless people in Indochina, in the Southeast Asia, in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos. Johnson was trying to pull out of the war at that point, and he was trying to help the election of his VP, Hubert Humphreys. Meanwhile, and this is according to Seymour Hersh, who's one of the great investigative journalists of all time, Henry Kissinger, who was an advisor to Johnson's Vietnam peace talks, apparently he had told, or alleged, according to Seymour Hersh, he had told Nixon's team that things were going well with the negotiations to pull out of South Vietnam, and this prompted the Nixon campaign to establish this secret channel to the South Vietnamese through this fundraiser named Anna Chennault, who was, I think she was the widow of this really famous aviator who had worked with Chinese pilots during World War II. And she had become like a really big, prominent fundraiser in the Republican Party during the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So she actually acted as a conduit for urging the South Vietnamese to resist Johnson's peace deal, and she basically said that you'll get a better deal under Nixon,
which is nuts.
What ended up happening is that South Vietnam they boycotted the peace talks, and the deal completely just unraveled.
Right.
And when you look at it in that time period, in that frame, this is 1968. 1968 is the bloodiest year of the Vietnam War. The second bloodiest year is 69, and then the war kind of gradually dies. Doesn't gradually, but the casualty figures go down from 1969 on until we eventually pull out. But in total, about 20,000 more U.S. soldiers died.
Yep. Not to mention the millions of people in Vietnam and the area.
Yeah, not to mention the secret bombings in Cambodia and Laos
Right.
and all these really big atrocities that were going on in that area of the world. And apparently Johnson had known this because he had been spying on the Nixon campaign. And there is when Johnson's presidential library released audio tapes of him talking about what he had called the Nixon treason. So there seems that, obviously, I can't confirm this with absolute, with 100% certainty, but I don't know. It seems like this is actually something that happened.
I mean, it seems likely. A lot of the ancillary stuff that we've researched on this time period, suggests the same. And I know that some of the stuff with poor Carter later on, also suggests the same. So I don't know. I think it might be real.
I think it may be. What makes me think that this was an actual collusion to prevent Johnson from pulling out of the war, because Nixon, it's hard to say these things being our age, to be completely honest, because we weren't born yet, and it's hard to get an understanding of the time period when you didn't live through it, but then there's a generation above you has lived through it. Yeah, don't you ever get that feeling? It's a
little bit, but you know what? I feel like all of us suffer from it. We're in these times now, and we can only speculate based on the information that we get. Now, granted, we get a lot more information and a lot quicker than the generations back during the the Nixon administration, as an example, during the Johnson administration, but they still had to rely on that journalism as well. They still had to rely on hearing it from somebody else. At least at the time, they had respected journalists, which I'm sure we're going to cover a bit later. But we only know as much as what was written down, and as much as what was investigated by journalists. So I think we today, sitting here now with the internet and the ability to do this research and look at pretty much every book and every article that's ever been written ever, we probably have just as much capacity to understand the events that happened then as, if not more, than people who were growing up in that time, because all they had access to was whatever newspaper got sent to their house or whatever TV station happened to be broadcasting during that time. I think we're probably in a better position to understand it.
That's an interesting point, but it's hard to feel. I don't know if someone's going to be able to feel the way 2020, who's investigating this from 2040.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. It's you have to live through it to understand.
Yeah, no. You have to understand. When it comes to an election, you have to be immersed in the culture to understand what
the stakes were, what the
stakes were, or
was.
what the narratives were from both factions.
The zeitgeist, if you will,
Yeah. Well, what were the narratives? It's hard for me to talk about elections that take place in other countries, especially in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And I'm reluctant to talk about them because I'm I don't know what the fuck is going on in the ground there. When we talk about elections in Syria, or when we were talking about the elections in Belarus that were most likely completely phony,
90% or whatever,
90% elections.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can always point that out, in the case of Yemen, when Hadi was the only person on the ballot.
Yeah, and he still only got 90%.
And he was on the ballot, and illegitimate Hillary Clinton's
This was a period of democracy.
Yeah, there's one person on the ballot.
Yeah.
That's not democracy. That is a I don't know what that is.
That's a something-cracy. Ludicrousy.
That is not a election if there's only one name on ballot. Yeah, so you can say, yeah, that is obviously a fraud, and look at that. But in other cases, like it's difficult to like judge like the real opposition and the fake opposition, because there's plenty of those. There's plenty of real opposition, and there's plenty of fake opposition too.
Yeah.
All these different crises and all these different countries and all these kind of color revolutions that take place. But in the case of like the U in this, it's like it's kind of weird to read back and like, man, am I just reading this through the lens, or am I looking at this through the lens of just one massive like conspiracy of power? Is that the only way I'm looking at this?
Right.
That's like the feeling I get when
is this the fake like, news of the day?
History,
you know?
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, sometimes I have to like step back and think about it. Like, wait, is this like the then fake news, or what's the political bent of the person that wrote this? You know. But maybe that's just a product of our time now, you know, as one of our viewers right now points out, you know, then there's probably more neutral and less biased, reporting than there is now, but kind of like a product of living through this time period that we're living in kind of makes us very skeptical of literally everyone and everything that comes across our desk, because we kind of have to be, you know?
Well, now we have a period of like, back in like the 70s and 60s and 70s, they were way better journalists. Like even now, like the best journalists are like
the old guys,
like they're like in their 70s.
Yeah,
like Gareth Porter, who's like 78 or so. He was a product of the Vietnam War. Then you have guys like Robert Perry, who passed away in his 60s a couple of years ago.
Who we looked at for this
was
episode,
a product of like a lot of the things that were going on in the 80s with Iran-Contra. But you have like a lot of, even the Washington Post was doing, you know, they released the Pentagon Papers and were doing real whistleblowing. But at some point, a lot of that stopped, and now it's just complete like narrative control at all times. Like there's no journalism, it's just narrative control. Like something like even as we speak right now, narrative control is going on Twitter. That's why it's like so hard to even be on Twitter. You just get bombarded with just fucking propaganda at all times. Like, you need to think this way. All right, this news came out. All right, this is what you have to think about it.
And the funny thing is that now they have like robots that do it, like AI that does it. It's not even like human beings anymore. It's just like now they can just literally make a machine do it for us.
Yeah, you can literally just there's algorithms to control narratives at this point. So it's weird. So I think in those terms, yeah, I think there was a better chance for like actual like journalism to take place back in those days.
But even
a lot
in
of
those
it now
days,
is the system, is the monetary system behind how these websites work. Like it's fucking clickbait. Like it's I'm gonna sound like a leftist right here, but I think it's like a good term. Like it's what's the fucking, why I just escaped.
Capitalism? Clickitalism?
What do you call when something's very clickable?
Clickbaity.
Clickbait capitalism. I don't know why that escaped me. But yeah, like when you write an article, when we make a bro history podcast and we release it, we're trying to think of a title that like will make people want to listen to the podcast.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just part of releasing content.
It's part of the game.
That's how a lot of that's how websites are designed to make money. The more if you don't click on the link, then you don't get paid from your advertisers.
Right. But I mean, it's just like same game, different like format, really. Though we've got a really interesting system now, but like back in the day, there was still, you know, capital that was behind a lot of these reportings. It just wasn't as overt and as annoying as it is now, or as constant as it is now. At
least. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna. It had its fair share of problems too, and I think what we found out doing research on these October surprises was that there were plenty of opportunities for, you know, real journalism or real, you know, kind of investigations to open the eyes of the American public, and some of these publications either willfully turned a blind eye to it, or just were dumb. And a lot of these things, like you used the word treason before, some of it really comes off to me as treason.
Yeah. So another really big case of this is the Reagan-Carter election.
Yep. I actually felt so bad about Carter. Like, reading that one particular article, it was kind of made me upset, man. It felt like he was damned if he did and damned if he didn't, I feel like.
So what we're talking about is so the end of Carter's presidency was plagued by a very pretty much a disastrous thing foreign policy wise that happened to him, and that was the Iranian Revolution.
Right.
And what made matters a lot worse is that he was put in a really, I guess he was put in a pretty bad situation with the Iranian Revolution. The Shah of Iran had to leave the country. He had cancer, and he was about to be deposed. There was a coup that was taking place, and the Shah had a very close relationship with the United States since 1953, since the original, since the 1953 Iranian coup d'etat, when the old boys of the CIA basically completely overthrew that government by subverting protest and paying them to break shit in the name of their president's name. Those old boys were actually huge critics of Carter, and when the Shah left Iran, his twin sister went to go plead with David Rockefeller, who was the chairman of Chase Bank.
Yep. And
she was like, hey, my brother is going to die. Please please convince Jimmy Carter, or get into his ear and say that he can come into the country, because
he only had a week, right? He got put on a week's notice to leave the country that he was in asylum in. Was it Morocco at the time?
It was Morocco.
Mm-hmm.
So she was like, please get into the ear of Carter, using your connections to help him get into the country. And Carter didn't want to give him. Carter wanted to avoid this because he thought that if he let the Shah into the U.S., then that would lead to a attack on the U.S. embassy in Iran. Because this was before this. The Iranian hostage crisis happened about a year or so after the revolution actually took place.
Right.
It happened. The Iranian Revolution it was 1978, beginning of 1978, and then it ended in it lasted about a year, and then the Shah had to leave Iran in the very beginning of 1979.
And he went to Egypt first, and then to
he went
Morocco.
to Egypt, then Morocco, and then after he had left, Ayatollah Khomeini came on the very first day of February on 1979.
Right.
So the actual hostage crisis, when those students took over the embassy, I think that happened later, late 1979, around November of 1979 is when that hostage crisis took place.
You know what? It might have been November, because I remember reading that there was a 365-day clock, countdown clock, as soon as that happened.
Yeah. For
the election to boot out and bring in the next president. So yeah, you're totally right there.
So,
but by many accounts, though, that the hostage situation kind of happened accidentally.
Yeah. So what happened was that the student group that went to go that scored the U.S. embassy there,
right?
This was an attempt to find evidence of the 1953 coup.
Right, the meddling.
They were looking for evidence that showed that the CIA had been actively looking to overthrow Mossadegh and place them with the Shah.
Right.
And they kind of ran into they kind of like ran into the hostage crisis.
Right. Apparently they brought wire cutters with them. They cut down the fence. They went inside and they were like met almost oppositionless. And when they finally got in there, they're like, they see all these Americans. Some of them are running. They chase them down. They capture them. And then the Marines, apparently they didn't use deadly force because they wanted to prevent bloodshed, which was, on the one hand, really, commendable, but on the other hand, resulted in, the fact that those Americans became hostages in the first place. And they were throwing tear gas at them, and obviously that didn't really stop them. Tear gas really not super effective. You can throw it back. But yeah, they never intended to. It was just a bunch of students, a bunch of kids by all account. I think there was like this one Mossad agent that was working with the U.S. government there and had produced a list of all of the people who was involved in the hostage situation, and like the majority of them were straight up kids, like school kids. They never intended to set up a hostage situation, but that's just what they fell into when they tried to storm the U.S. embassy.
Yeah, well, but going back, because I kind of skipped this part of the story. So Rockefeller did have one of his intermediaries, I think he handed like a memo to Carter with grievances about not letting the Shah in, and then Carter let the Shah in for humanitarian reasons.
Right. He went down to the Bahamas or some shit, or was it Mexico?
He ended up it was Mexico. So when Carter, so they let the Shah in. I'm not sure if that's exactly what triggered the Iranian the hostage crisis, but then.
Well, the reason why they let him in was because he was having terminal cancer and he needed treatment, right? And when they brought him into New York and they admitted him. I forget the name of the hospital, but they called him David Newsom, which was one of the Carter administration's people. So they named him after him, which was pretty interesting. But yeah, that's the reason why I brought him in, because dude needed some medical attention, and Jimmy Carter kind of caved. He's a little too empathetic in that respect.
Well, Jimmy Carter made a series of really big blunders. I mean, I don't really mind probably taking the Shah in kind of revealed the hand that Shah was an actual puppet. But I mean, I think everyone actually knew that at that time,
right?
That the Shah was a U.S. puppet. They were having minor oil disputes in the 70s, but I think otherwise, I mean, they were getting F-14s, man.
F-4s, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They were getting everything except the bomb. The only thing that the Iranian military was not getting from the United States was a nuclear bomb.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's one of the big reasons why there was a covert operation for the U.S. to supply arms to them during the Iran-Iraq wars, because they needed spare parts for those weapons that they bought when the Shah was on the peacock throne. Because planes regularly need spare parts. But Carter made a really big plan, a really big mistake when there was essentially a failed attempt to rescue those hostages.
This was good too.
Long story short, a helicopter crash, and
no, you're not doing it justice with the helicopter crash. Actually, it was fucking interesting. So I forget exactly who put up this idea, but it was one of the folks on the Republican side had said, look, we can send in some covert assets from Iran on the ground. So Iranian, Persian-speaking people are assets on the ground. We're going to dress them up like military police, and we're going to send them into the embassy, and we're going to have them say, hey, you guys are doing a great job, love what you're doing here, but we're going to take over from here because we heard that there are some U.S. forces coming in from outside of the city. So we're going to take all the hostages and we're going to spread them out all over the city. Good job, we got it from here. That was the plan that, and I'm having trouble pulling up the exact person's name, but
it was Copeland.
Copeland, thank you. That was Copeland's plan, right? And then afterwards, this plan actually sounded pretty fucking good. Like the idea was that they were going to take the hostages, spread them out to the outskirts of Tehran, and then pick them up in helicopters outside of the city limits and then just bring them home, right? Sounded pretty interesting. Like if they could have pulled that off, that would have been like an awesome movie plot. But they didn't do that, and instead they opted for like Eagle One, I think was the name of the operation. Where Eagle Claw, thank you. Where they were literally just gonna take several like attack helicopters and storm Tehran and go right to the embassy and like pick up their guys and go. But because of like some technical issues, it forced a lot of those helicopters to return to base, and then ultimately they ended up in a midair collision, which lost the lives of I think it was 8 people died. 8 servicemen died on that in that situation. So yeah, that was a crazy fucking story. Carter could totally took that like covert version, and then afterwards the Iranians did exactly what we were planning on like covertly doing. They took everybody out of the embassy and they moved them to all different parts of the city, and they spread them out so that they're not in one place. And then now we can't do that plan anymore, and now like the idea of like going in and rescuing them with force was like completely off the table because none of them were in the same place anymore.
It was those were like the original CIA guys too, like Miles Copeland and Kermit Roosevelt, like those guys.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Those were the guys who came up with that plan, and Kermit Roosevelt was out of the CIA at that time.
The other Roosevelt, well, Archibald.
You're never out of the CIA.
Yeah. Archibald was involved too, right? Archibald Roosevelt.
Yeah. That would have been the ideal plan, right? To covertly go in there. I mean, that's what they're trying to do.
Right.
Is to find a way to deceive the enemy into letting you in so you can rescue the hostage. I mean, come on, haven't you seen the movie Argo?
Or Black Hawk Down?
Well, Argo was more of a covert thing.
I know.
Black Hawk Down was.
That's more of like a why you shouldn't use helicopters to save people.
But that ended up being like a really big disaster for his reelection for obvious reasons, because it was a bad choice.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, I get what the accusation is for. I guess where this ties into the October surprise is that there is a pretty, I think, probably probable theory that the Reagan camp had reached out to the Iranians and had met with them to keep them to facilitate or to keep the hostages in place, to not have them released until the Reagan presidency,
mm-hmm.
Unless Reagan won the presidency, and that's why Reagan. That's why the hostages were released when Reagan was inaugurated on January 20th of 1980, because they had already worked out a deal with the Iranians, and it was I guess that deal was very well known. Like the day that he was inaugurated, then those hostages would be released. And I think Carter, there was a clock like every single day, like day 1 of the hostage crisis, day 54 of the hostage crisis.
Right.
There was a literal clock. Like imagine if there was it would be just a disaster for any campaign. And the way that connects to future events is that the U.S. and Israel were both um, sponsoring. I mean, this is where it gets confusing because the United States was sponsoring Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War, but they were also covertly selling them spare parts for planes.
Mm-hmm.
And then Israel was, I guess, covertly but overtly supporting Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. I mean, they were collaborating with them with military operations and destroying Iraqi nuclear facilities
right
at the very beginning of the war. So it was just like this hodgepodge.
Yeah.
It was just a complete clusterfuck. It's just two of these insane events were going on at the same time between the Iran-Iraq War along with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
Add the Contra thing to the mix.
Contra scandal, yeah.
The Contra scandals, just these ridiculous situations that are going on. It's just a mess. But I guess the incentive for the deal to work with
Iran,
or the deal why Iran would work with Reagan is because I guess they had got the wink and the nod that they would be supplying them with weapons. That they had to have somebody, at least they had to have some type of relationship with the United States for to be supplemented with these parts.
Right. So same situation out of the playbook for Nixon with the South Vietnamese president, right? Like the wink and the nod that we're going to give you a better deal, just like don't go along with whatever they're doing. And then,
So this is from a former National Security Counsel, Gary Sick, and he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and this was pretty. This was like when this was released. I think this was released in 1992. This was a humongous deal, and I'll just quote from this. So individuals associated with the Reagan-Bush campaign of 1980 met secretly with Iranian officials to delay the release of the American hostages until after the presidential election. For this favor, Iran was rewarded with a substantial supply of arms from Israel. In December 1979 and January 1980, Cyrus and Jamshid Hashemi, two brothers who had good contacts in Iranian revolutionary circles, approached the Carter administration seeking support for their candidate in the Iranian presidential elections. I met both of them briefly during that period. Although Washington was sympathetic, their appeal was overtaken by events. Their candidate lost, but they remained in contact with the U.S. government, providing useful information about developments in the hostage crisis. Cyrus died in 1986, only 3 months after his cooperation with the U.S. Customs Service in a dramatic sting operation that resulted in the arrest of several Americans, Israelis, and Europeans on charges of plotting illegal arms sales. Jamshid Hashemi, who was involved in international arms sales, was not implicated in that affair. I reestablished contact with Mr. Hashemi in March 1990 and interviewed him a number of times. According to Mr. Hashemi, William Casey, who had just become Reagan's campaign manager, met with him late February or early March 1980 at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington. I've actually heard this story about the Mayflower Hotel in other reports. Mr. Casey quickly made it clear that he wanted to prevent Jimmy Carter from gaining any political advantage from the hostage crisis. The Hashemis agreed to cooperate with Mr. Casey without the knowledge of the Carter administration. Mr. Hashemi told me that he and his brother helped to arrange two critical meetings. In a Madrid hotel in July 1980, an important Iranian clerk, Mehdi Karoubi, who is now Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, allegedly met with Mr. Casey and a U.S. intelligence officer who was operating outside authority. The same group met again several weeks later. Mr. Hashemi told me that Mr. Karoubi agreed in the second Madrid meeting to cooperate with the Reagan campaign about the timing of any hostage release. So I've read about this this Madrid meeting,
In
with
the
William
Mayflower
Casey.
Hotel, yep, in Washington. Mm-hmm.
In return, he was promised that the Reagan administration, once in office, would return Iran's frozen assets and help them acquire badly needed military equipment and spare parts. Two other sources subsequently described these meetings in very similar terms in interviews with me and my colleagues. The Carter administration had no knowledge of these meetings. At about the time of the second meeting in Madrid, according to two former Israeli intelligence officers I interviewed, individuals associated with the Reagan campaign made contact with senior government officials in Israel, which agreed to act as the channel for the arms deliveries to Iran that Mr. Casey had promised. Israel had been eager to sell military equipment to Iran, but the Carter administration, which was maintaining a total arms embargo on Iran, had refused to agree. As the threat of war with Iraq began to mount in early September 1980, Iran opened direct hostage negotiations with the Carter administration. In retrospect, it appears that Iran may have been playing both sides, seeking the highest bids for the release of the hostages. The Carter administration, however, did not realize it was involved in a three-cornered bidding contest and resisted Iran's apparent interest in military equipment. The Iraqi invasion of Iran on September 22, 1980 added both urgency and confusion to the various negotiation tracks. Two former Reagan campaign aides told me that this generated new fears with the Reagan-Bush campaign that war pressures would lead Iran to release the hostages before Election Day, thereby improving President Carter's chances. Adding to the complexity, the Carter administration secretly had been developing plans for a possible second hostage rescue mission.
Yeah,
that would have
sure.
been a disaster. After the
Seriously?
failure of its earlier mission, Desert One, in April. It became operational in September 1980. Richard V. Allen, Ronald Reagan's first national security advisor and a member of his campaign, told me that one member of the rescue team contacted him and gave him a description of the second rescue plan. Shortly thereafter, the Reagan-Bush campaign launched a major publicity effort warning that President Carter might be planning an October surprise to obtain the release of the hostages prior to the election. Oof. This is
So hold on before you continue. Now we've got a situation where the Reagan administration is working kind of covertly with, elements inside the Iranian country to get them to cooperate on any hostage stuff, so that it, one, doesn't benefit the Carter administration, and that, two, it benefits specifically the Reagan administration, the potential Reagan administration, at least his election ability. And on the other side, we have Carter trying to work out some plans to get the hostages, and he comes up with the second idea to rescue the hostages, even though the first one failed fucking miserably. And the Reagan administration uses this as a kind of political weapon, and saying like, oh, Carter is only trying to save the hostages so that he can win re-election this year. Did I understand that story so far correctly?
Yeah, and I think the CIA, from like firsthand testimonies and accounts and interviews from them, I feel like the mentality was like, hey, listen, if you're a diplomat and if you work in an embassy, you're kind of like a soldier in the army. Like, you're knowingly taking the risk of like something terrible happening to you if you're going into a foreign country.
Mm-hmm. Especially a potentially hostile one, right?
Yeah, especially one that's in a hostile area of the world.
An active world war zone, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So from October 15th to October 20th, events came to a head in a series of meetings in several hotels in Paris involving members of the Reagan-Bush campaign and high-level Iranian and Israeli representatives. Accounts of these meetings and the exact numbers of participants vary considerably among the more than 15 sources who claim direct or indirect knowledge of some aspect of them. There is, however, widespread agreement on 3 points. William Casey was a key participant. The Iranian representatives agreed that the hostages would not be released prior to the presidential election on November 4th. In return, Israel would serve as a conduit for arms and spare parts to Iran. Mm-hmm. Doesn't this tie
Ties
together?
really, really well with our previous episodes on the Iran-Iraq war.
And also with Iran, when we talked about Iran Contra.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Immediately after the Paris meetings, things began to happen. On October 21st, Iran publicly shifted its position in negotiations with the Carter administration, disclaiming any further interest in receiving military equipment. From my position at the NSC, I learned that Cyrus Hashemi and other Iranian arms dealers secretly had reported to State Department officials that Iran had decided to hold the hostages until after the elections. Between October 21st and October 23rd, Israel sent a plane hold of F-4 fighter aircraft tires to Iran in a contravention of the U.S. boycott and without informing Washington. Cyrus Hashemi, using his own contacts, began privately organizing military shipments to Iran. On October 22nd, the hostages were suddenly dispersed to different locations. In a series of delaying tactics in late October by the Iranian parliament stymied all attempts by the Carter administration to act on the hostage question until only hours before Election Day. Excuse me. After the election, the lame duck Carter administration resumed hostage negotiations through Algerian intermediaries, but the talks stalled. On January 15th, Iran did an about-face offering a series of startling concessions that reignited the talks and resulted in a final agreement in the last few hours of Jimmy Carter's presidency. The hostages released were on January 21st, 1981, minutes after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as president.
That's fucking nuts, man.
I don't think there's any more that we have to go through this, do we?
No.
Yeah.
That is like... I mean, it's not like smoking gun, but like you can't deny that that's not a coincidence, you know? Like the sheer timing of that. The about face that they make in late January, you know? To be like, oh no, yeah, let's start talking again about this, this hostage situation.
I just think it's hilarious how people are always use the word unprecedented nowadays. Like it's unprecedented. This is completely unprecedented.
Unprecedented abuse of power.
This is unprecedented.
Yeah.
I feel like
it was precedented.
This stuff is like extreme corruption
is precedented.
It's precedent. It is the precedent. Like it's always been going on. There's always been terrible things that have been going on behind the scenes. There's always been fucking everything. All these people are doing things for Machiavellian reasons.
Well, then, I mean, it begs the question here, Henry, right? So we're talking about an October surprise, right? And we talked about two major October surprises in the past. And I'll note, very importantly, that both of these October surprises were allegedly perpetrated by Republicans. So when the left and the Democrats and the media get all up in arms about Trump and Russia or Ukraine or any of these other things, can you really blame them?
No, no. Yes, excuse me. Yes, I blame them because they're the ones who are doing it now. Like they're the ones who are on the mantle of making up. Well, I can absolutely blame them because this Russia Gate thing is so ridiculous and so silly. The foreign policy of Donald Trump doesn't even match up with the actual motives. Like, what has Trump done for Russia? Like, what has he done? Like, what? How has he cooperated with Vladimir Putin in any way? Like, it just doesn't
sanctions on Russia.
Any possible? He put sanctions on Russia.
He's still other ones, yeah, and he took people off of. He took specific oligarchs off of sanctions. So like he's playing the game. He's doing his thing.
I do not see. There's absolutely no evidence of this. There's no evidence of the CrowdStrike even came out, said there is no evidence of Russian collusion and the DNC hacking. So that's even a really big question. That's a huge question mark. I mean, to this day, man, I think that those hacks, Russia didn't hack. I will die on this hill. I think that Seth Rich was murdered for that stuff, and that was the reason how WikiLeaks got that information from the DNC server. But no, the U.S. is still has an extremely hostile foreign policy towards Russia. Like, it hasn't backed up. It has, like, overall as a country, as it's the U.S. has not been playing ball with them. Mm-hmm. Like, I just do not get the Russian collusion story.
I mean, but on record, that's kind of the Republican playbook, though. You know, it's like, let's collude with exterior.
Trump is not the Republican Party.
Trump has a lot of establishment in his party.
You see what happened?
The entire Republican establishment has capitulated to it.
Certain peoples of the establishment have capitulated to him. Did John McCain capitulate to him?
He died.
No.
He died. Okay.
No, John McCain was dead set against him. John McCain was an establishment Republican.
I don't know, man.
Did Bush family capitulate to him?
How about Ted Cruz? How about
Ted Cruz came into the Tea Party movement. Those are completely different.
What about Mitch McConnell? What about Lindsey Graham? What about
some people are, and Lindsey Graham is different on a lot of things.
Lindsey Graham is different on a lot of things.
Lindsey Graham's
they're killing me.
Person, but the insane neoconservatives. John Bolton, granted. Yeah. Trump had to sell his soul to the devil to guys like Sheldon Adelson to have his Senate pushed in and have money donated.
Right.
But no, that Trump is not the same group as the Nixon group, and
I don't know, but he's being advised by the same people. So I think it's naive. Hold on, because I think it's naive to think that, because, dude, a lot of the same establishment nonsense people who are involved in these situations and others like it were the ones that were advising his campaign and ultimately helping him and are in his administration or were at one point in his administration. I think it's a little bit naive to think that they wouldn't whisper ideas like these in his ear. Now, whether or not he committed them or not is up for debate. But I think it's totally fair to say this was the Republican playbook for like 30, 40 years, right? And a lot of these elements are still kind of in the political sphere, and many of them ended up in the Trump campaign, or at least are surrounding themselves around the Trump campaign. And Trump does some shady shit. Trump does some shit that makes you raise an eyebrow, right? It's just whether or not it's illegal or not is irrelevant. It's just like, why would you do that? It raises some questions, and that's what I'm trying to get at. I totally think that it's possible that one of these neocons whispered some sweet nothings into Donald Trump's ear, and maybe he pulled the trigger on some of them. Maybe he didn't. I think it's totally fair to be worried about it, because this is an establishment neocon playbook.
Well, those events took place before the neoconservative movements really took off, and the Nixon move, the Nixon thing.
That's a fair point, but that's how they developed, right? So, like, elements of the Liberal Party.
The neoconservatives came from the Democratic Party.
That's exactly what I'm trying to get at.
Scoop Jackson.
That's exactly what I changed. They were right-leaning Democrats, and then they eventually. They weren't
right-leaning. They were Trotskyists.
They were absolutely intellectual.
They were former Trotskyist leftists who found the opportunity to jump into the Republican power just for pure power purposes. They didn't really have a political ideology, but their actual ideology came from they were Trotskyists. They were left-wing Trotskyists. And when you talk about, like, a Republican handbook, this is just a political handbook that's used on both sides. Like, do you see all the corruption that came out of Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton playbook? All the money they took from Saudi Arabia, the money they took from Russian oligarchs.
I'm not going to doubt that. I won't doubt that. They did some shady shit, especially to Bernie.
It's really difficult to pinpoint that type of action. Yeah, the Republican Party in the 70s and 80s was incredibly corrupt. They sponsored covert evil wars. They did some really shady stuff with elections, completely bad. But this is something that is pretty status quo between every single major political party, and I think that
then I think it's fair. It's fair to hold
segment out the Republicans is like the problem.
All right, fair enough. You know what? You're right. I will. You're right. I will concede to that. It's not fair to only point the finger at the Republicans. However, I think it is totally fair to point the finger at who holds the power currently, and that happens to be.
The finger at
that happens
Trump,
to be
and I
the
think it's very
Republicans.
fair.
Well, it's not just Trump; it's also the Republican
but
Senate
you need
and
to go,
now
you
the
need
Republican
to go,
court.
we need to go back in reverse time and look at like the scandals that have taken place in every presidential.
Sure, and we should call them all out. We should, yeah, absolutely. We should call all of them out equally.
We can go down the list of Obama scandals, and
I'm not averse to that. I'm not averse to that.
But Obama covertly sponsored Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria and Libya.
Right.
He destroyed countries. He destroyed Syria. He destroyed Libya. He took a functioning government, the wealthiest country in Africa, and he destroyed it. And he did it because of pressure from people like Hillary Clinton and Susan Rice and just neoliberal hawks. They weren't neoconservatives. They were kind of weirdo neoliberals who believed in some type of weird humanitarian intervention type thing. Libya was a destroyed country that had open air slavery the years after this destruction.
Right,
it was a
right.
functioning society,
but I don't want
to.
I'm not saying that any of that is wrong. I'm just saying that Obama's not the president right now.
He's not the president right now.
We're talking about Trump today.
That was a universal thing that was accepted in the Democratic establishment to arm and to knowingly, at least when the Reagan administration was arming Al Qaeda, or at least the Mujahideen, and kind of the thing that eventually morphed into Al Qaeda,
right?
When before Bin Laden and
fucking disaster to begin with, right?
Their groups before Islamic Jihad and the Bin Laden groups merged together. At least they weren't attacking Americans. They were giving them money after all this terrible thing, all after 9/11, after the Iraq War, when the majority of deaths from U.S. soldiers were done by Al Qaeda in Iraq. Like, they were sponsoring after all this stuff. So like, you can't just pinpoint corruption on one political party. It's both ones.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying that our current political party. We're talking about October surprises. It's October. We're about to be in an election, and our current political leadership happens to be Republican. So I think it's fair to today, criticize Republicans right now.
It's fair to criticize Republicans, but it's also fair to criticize Democrats too.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you can't.
For the handling and for just everything that took place between Trump's election and now has
well, if you ask me, I think he's brought a number of things upon himself.
I'm sure, man. I'm not saying that Trump hasn't brought a lot of these things upon himself, but the whole fucking collusion circus was a disgrace. Like that, there is still no evidence. You have people like Adam Schiff speaking in certain terms that there was an actual collusion between Russia and Trump. There was a whole fucking stupid investigation from Robert Mueller that showed up zero evidence that there was any type of collusion.
Well, he said he didn't say that. He didn't say that.
What evidence of
he didn't say that. No, Robert Mueller wrote if there.
What did he say?
He said that if there wasn't anything, he literally was saying I can't indict a sitting president, and therefore I can't really say that he's done anything wrong because it wouldn't fucking matter. I'm paraphrasing very loosely, but he didn't. He said if there was exculpatory evidence that says that Trump did nothing wrong, I would say so. I'm not saying that right now. So Robert Mueller's investigation didn't come up bone dry. It just came up fucking stalemate because there are precedents in our legal and judicial system that don't allow you to indict a sitting president. So you can't pursue any of those leads in the ways that I'm sure that Robert Mueller would have loved to. And that's that.
What leads? Like, there's no evidence. There's nothing. There's no like connection that anyone.
Why would he write it that way though?
Reasonable.
I mean, we don't have to.
There was like an actual meeting in place where they were talking about, like.
I mean,
they were talking about
save for Flynn. How many of his save for Flynn, because we're on debate for the Flynn one. But like, how many of his...
It was the most egregious one.
Right. I said save for Flynn, meaning excluding Flynn. How many other of his campaign aides and members ended up in jail or ended up indicted for wrongdoings during the campaign? It's not a coincidence. Like, it's just like he is surrounded by this web of fucking nonsense. You know, there's like a saying that I'll butcher, but it says like, you know, if you smell shit here, it's like dog shit on the floor, but if you smell shit everywhere you go, you smell like shit, you know? And it seems like everywhere Trump goes, he smells like shit. And all I hear, especially from the right, is just this apology, diversion. And I'm like, how many times do we have to see people ancillary to the Trump campaign to not be like, what fucked up shit do you actually think he's doing? Because there's a lot of shit. There's a lot. And I agree that the mainstream media really pumps up a lot of this shit to higher than what it needs to be. But there's so much shit. There's so much. So many things happen over the last 4 years. All of it can't be wrong. Like, literally, all of it cannot be wrong. That's just crazy.
I am a fierce critic on things that I disagree with Trump. Listen, we did entire podcast criticizing Trump on the Yemen veto. Mm-hmm. We have done entire podcast criticizing Trump on shady deals with Saudi Arabia.
Right.
We have done entire podcasts trading his his relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu through his son-in-law Jared Kushner, and how ridiculous it is. And I am more than happy to criticize Trump when there's warranted, and there's plenty to go around. I'm just saying the narratives that are coming from like MSNBC don't even hit the mark. Like, they're baseless, and I feel the reason why they resort to baseless claims is because if they were to criticize Trump on his relationship with Saudi Arabia or Benjamin Netanyahu and the nepotism that, I mean, he is criticized for the Jared Kushner nepotism
quite a bit, actually.
If he were to be criticized for real issues, that it would also indict other presidents as well. Like, it would indict the same type of relationships. It would indict
Obama. It would indict fucking George Bush.
So
it would indict
I'm fine.
The Clintons.
I'm absolutely fine with criticizing Trump and uncovering investigation. If you disagree with his, I know that you on a domestic level, just not, you take away his scandals, I know that you disagree with a lot of his policies regarding like climate and change and things.
I think he's wrong on a lot of domestic issues.
You think he's wrong if you take that out. And I'm saying it's fair to criticize him on that. I think it's fair to look at the actual corruption cases, but some of these are just made up fantasies, and they're made up fantasies to push him out because of some policy goals that he wanted to pursue. Specifically, the Afghanistan pullout and the Syria pullout are the main ones that they stem from. If you look at Michael Flynn, like, why was Michael Flynn an enemy with Barack Obama? Because they disagreed on Syria, and Michael Flynn, the DIA, they're the ones who really first blew the whistle on this arming of jihadists in Syria. Like, it's not a coincidence that Flynn was kind of like one of the first fall guys to go down, because he was a political enemy of Barack Obama and that whole mess. I don't know. I just think that the whole system is just that's what it's going back to the debate. Like, I'm glad that people get to see the unmasked ugliness of all this stuff, because it's just ugliness.
Yeah, no, I hear that, you know, and I think we were sitting there on the same couch watching the same exact thing, and we had pretty much the same exact reactions to almost every response to every question. Most of it was bullshit. Most of it was pandering. A lot of it was incoherent, to be honest. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm kind of happy that we saw that just beautiful display of nonsense, because it does highlight how fucking stupid this system is and how stupid this two-party system is. As a matter of fact, I was reading today that Joe Jorgensen is apparently trending 13th since the debate on Google
That's a big
searches.
jump for her.
Huge jump, right? Not that I give a shit about Joe Jorgensen or that I think she's a good alternative, but it just kind of, I think, highlights the hunger in this country for something else, anything else, literally anything else on both sides of the aisle. Like, all of these options suck.
The issue with her is that she's about as interesting, as appealing as a wet paper bag. So,
well, I mean, the whole fucking party is about as interesting as a wet paper bag, in my opinion. But I think I haven't even given her any credit at all because it's not viable, in my opinion.
I've never.
Not on our current system.
I'm pretty much a libertarian for most. I think most people would probably consider me a libertarian, at least people who are not. And I wouldn't touch the LP with a 10-foot stick.
Yeah,
that's how.
Interested because it's different from like party and
libertarian party.
Yeah, party and ideology, completely different. Like I feel like they're not aligned at all.
LP is just ran by a bunch of dorks.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the war in Armenia?
Yeah. Let's talk about some lighter topics to end the show.
Kind of went off. We went off in a little bit of a tangent there, but hopefully you guys like the
back and forth.
The back and forth. So the war in Armenia. So if there wasn't a debate, we probably would have led with this story. So there is so I'll try to take this back. Nagorno-Karabakh, the most I'm sure everyone is very familiar with that place.
No.
Karabakh. It's a breakaway region in Azerbaijan, which is,
you just said a bunch of words that like just none of those.
Nagorno-Karabakh is all right. So in the Caspian Sea, it's a big fucking lake.
Right. Giant.
It's the world's biggest lake. And it's just smack right in Central Asia, and it's between it's right
all the Zhans and Stans.
All the Zhan countries.
Right.
And Russia is really close to that country too.
Right.
So it's in the Russia world, the ex-Soviet world. Well, it turns out in that big lake, it's the world's biggest lake. If you look at a world map, there's a bunch of oil in there.
Lots of fucking oil.
A lot of fucking oil in this big ass salt lake. And it's a very big interest for a lot of countries because of the pipelines that go from that big fucking lake and the oil that goes through multiple countries. And when the pipeline goes through these fucking countries and the oil passes through these countries, each country gets a tax on it. Each country makes money off that oil, off the pipelines. So Azerbaijan is the first country on that.
So they get the biggest cut, arguably.
They get the biggest. They get a big cut, and that goes through Turkey.
What is it, like $10 billion a year or something like that?
They get. I think it might be more, but just so we get the geography out of the way.
Right. It's in Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan. So in Azerbaijan, there is a breakaway country in there, filled with Armenians.
Sorry, Marshall, land bridge. I'm dying. Sorry. Marshall Maddox says, and they're gonna build a land bridge across it. Just awesome. Somebody listens frequently. Sorry.
The land
bridge.
So they have this fucking pipeline. This country was a Soviet Union country for about 7 decades.
Right.
And there had been a large population in a region called Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan in the middle of the mountains. And when the Soviet Union fell, there was always disputes over this area. But when the Soviet Union fell in 1988, a basically a separatist movement started after both Armenia and Azerbaijan declared dependent, or they became independent from the Soviet Union once they dissolved themselves. And then this area had Nagorno-Karabakh had a mixed population of both Azeris and Shia Muslim and Armenian Christians. And I guess just like every other country not every other country, but most countries in the Soviet Union after they broke out, a big flavor of ethnic nationalism happened.
Mm-hmm.
Surprise, surprise, because the countries were basically and they didn't really have a state history.
Right.
They were just satellite countries. So that happens when there is no state history. Ethnic groups start getting very kind of
popular,
antsy. Just look at Yugoslavian war music. Look at the war music of Yugoslavia.
Oh man,
and it's funny. Like the most ridiculous music videos from like Serbs, Croats. They're just look up Yugoslavian patriot music, war music, and
it's actually legitimately pretty funny. It's pretty funny.
That gives you a breakdown of what the type of media that was being consumed in those states at that time. But so a war broke out. There's been a peace treaty since 1994 that kind of put the lid on things. But now fighting has broke out again, and over 100 people at this point have been killed. The last time I looked at like the casualties was actually earlier in the week, so I'm assuming more than that, unless fighting has stopped. And what's really alarming is that both countries Armenia and Azerbaijan are fighting right now over this piece of land.
Right.
They're shooting artillery into each other's countries over each other's borders. So it's not limited to just one conflict zone.
Right. I mean, they've been fighting for a long time, so.
Yeah. In that region, Turkey's backed by Azerbaijan is backed by Turkey. They have a very good relationship, mainly because of the pipeline.
Right.
And then Russia backs both countries. They sell arms to both Azerbaijan and they sell arms to Armenia, but they have a tilt towards Armenia because they have a defense treaty.
They also have a military base there too. So
they also have a military base there as well.
Yeah. And
it's strange because Azerbaijan is due to start piping gas to the EU. I think in this year. And it's really weird that this decades-old conflict starts to flare up right before they're about to start piping in gas.
It doesn't sound strange at all. It doesn't sound strange at all.
I guess in theory that it could disrupt the oil and gas flow from Azerbaijan, since the pipeline there is called the BTC pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
It runs only 10 miles away from where the fighting is taking place. But I guess luckily oil markets haven't really been hit yet, and I guess that's due to COVID-19 because all the oil markets are all the oil producers have so much spare capacity because of the massive decline in consumption.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's really hard to destroy oil pipelines, believe it or not, because they're buried really deep underground.
Right, and they're built pretty strong because they have to withstand like a bunch of geological events and shit.
Yeah,
we're talking about $1 trillion industry. Like they're taking time to build this shit, right? At least in most cases.
Armenia can't just start shooting pipelines because then they'll just get nuked.
By who?
By somebody.
Yeah, I mean, probably. Look, follow the money. Obviously, this is like a money play, right? Somebody's mad that they're not getting money out of the pipeline. And that's why they're having this little skirmish.
Well, there was a flare-up a couple years ago as well. There's like always some flare ups, but this is the most intense one.
Right.
You'll find this interesting. Allegedly a Su-25 was shot down by F-16.
Really? In the area?
Yeah. So it was an Armenian Su-25 was shot down by it had to be a Turkish F-16 because they're the only ones around there that have them.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty interesting. I think I'll read more about that. But it was a confirmed F-16 or just like an F-series fighter?
I don't know. That's what Armenia is saying. It's not confirmed yet, but that's what they're claiming. They're saying an F-16 shot down a Su-25, and they're pinpointing Turkey of being the ones who did it because they're the only ones that had the F-16.
Yeah, I mean, it would be obvious that it would be Turkey if it was an F-16, but if it was a different F model and they just miscategorized it because they couldn't properly identify which one it was, then that might change because like who else would have a more advanced F fighter in that particular with a stake to that particular region?
I mean, Israel is backing Azerbaijan as well because they're in that pipeline order. So most likely it's Turkey because Turkey. This is already
doesn't Turkey have F-35s too now though?
I don't know if that deal's went through yet. I don't think they've actually made the purchase of the F-35. Like maybe they have, and I just haven't been paying attention. But I didn't know that. Like I think that maybe the ink was sold, but they sell those things in squadrons, right? Like they sell them in whatever size the squadron is, and then
it's like Costco. You can't just buy them. You can't just buy.
So I don't know. I don't know like if they have them or what. I don't follow it that closely. But I
mean, other interesting points. Marshall bringing up a few of them that Turkey has kind of beef with the Armenians in general because they've there's the whole Armenian genocide thing
because they still refuse to recognize the Armenian genocide.
Right. Right.
What? What that's genocide?
What genocide?
What? Yeah. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like
we're all on vacation.
They're like, well, listen, like, we didn't actually genocide them. We just made them go through a death march in a desert. That doesn't count. Because that's like what they did. They were just forced
terrible migration. It was
ethnic cleansing into the desert.
Right, which killed them. Which killed
them. It's like in Batman 3. It's like exile or death, or death or exile. What was do you remember Dark Knight Rising?
Yep.
And then he's like, death by exile.
That's what it was. It was Batman. It was Dark Knight Rising all over again. Well, the inspiration for.
And apparently 2 million people died. I don't know what the exact count is, but it seems to be a lot of people were killed in that incident. And I guess we always say in that part of the world, but I guess it's hard to forget about things like that. I guess they're kind of ingrained.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I only learned about the Armenian genocide probably like maybe.
Well, I'm not
10
talking
years
about
ago.
us.
I'm
not talking about us. I'm talking about like people Armenians don't forget it.
Right.
Dude, my mom's side of the family is very Irish, and we still talk about Oliver Cromwell, like he's still alive, and he's a bastard that needs to be taken care of, and he's the most evil person ever. Like Oliver Cromwell is still a subject of conversation in my Irish Catholic family. Like, oh, that's Oliver funny. Cromwell, he murdered so many, that was 400 years ago. that was 40000 years ago that happened, and he was posthumously hung. I think.
What? They hung him after the fact?
Some I forget the exact story.
Like ceremoniously, or actually took a corpse and hung
ceremoniously. I don't know if they actually took his corpse out, but they were like, "This person deserves to die, so we're going to have a little play about him being hung or something like that." But
that's fucking morbid.
He's very disliked in Irish culture. But the funniest thing about this entire situation is that Turkey is sending soldiers there, but not soldiers.
Soldiers, but not soldiers?
They're sending moderate rebels from Syria to the border to fight. And here's the kicker.
Wait, weren't they sending the same moderate rebels to Lebanon too? From Syria
to Egypt.
To Egypt, excuse me. Yeah.
But here's the kicker. It makes everything just hilarious. Azerbaijan is about 93% Shia.
Yeah, so that's not going to work out very
well. you're taking the Sunni moderate rebels who are killing people who are not Wahhabi, and you're throwing them into a Shia place, to a Shia majority country to protect their borders.
That's not going to work out very well.
When do these extreme guys, these extreme takfiri, like these really hardcore Islamist groups, when will they understand that they're nothing but cannon fodder to states that use them for their own gain? Like, someone needs to tell these kids who go and they travel to whatever country, or if they're from Syria, that they're straight up just being used as cannon.
I mean, the sad part, Henry, is that I bet they know, and that they're just so ingrained in that ideology that they don't care.
Syria is basically like Saudi Arabia uses the Sudan as kind of just like a place where they recruit mercenaries and child soldiers to fight in Yemen. Mm-hmm. Turkey just uses Syria at this point. It's like, this is just the failed state in our backyard that we helped produce. Mm-hmm. And we're just going to recruit, like, basically the people who are starving.
I mean, but they got to run out of people eventually, right? Like, that shit...
Syria is somewhat big. There's a lot of people who live in Syria.
Yeah, but in Idlib specifically, they're losing a lot of ground, you know, to Assad and Russia, for that matter. They don't hold as much territory as they used to.
They don't hold that much territory, but they still have territory there, and I mean they still have tens of thousands of soldiers there, and like they just kind of they recruit these
Caliphate 2.0 in Azerbaijan.
No, it's not going to come to that. These guys are just cannon fodder. There's only 2,000 of them apparently, but
it's still a lot of people, dude.
It's still a lot of people, but like it's not a sizable force to establish a caliphate. And like, you don't know if these guys are actual like hell bent on like creating a caliphate there. I doubt they are. I mean, they're obviously just mercenaries. Like, they're being paid. They're non-state contractors. Like, they're basically kind of Blackwater at this point.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's how the Obama administration felt about the moderate rebels in Syria when they first started. So,
but it's at this point, though, this has been years, a decade almost of this going on. Mm-hmm. They're either just like, this is their only means for any type of income at this point is taking a paycheck from Turkey that is minimal to go fight across the world, because once you start choosing mercenary as a career choice, then a lot of times there's not many options for you. There's not that many options in Syria in general right now.
You can't really write that on your LinkedIn, mercenary. Like, that's not a very good line item for your resume.
But I feel bad for these people because they're victims at the same time.
Yeah.
These people are victims. Not all of them are doing atrocities. It's just sad. It's just like a sad thing to read about and to hear about. Mm-hmm. I always these people who are kind of just like, I don't think that they have much foresight or future. They're used In a lot of cases, they use the guise of kind of religious higher purpose and theology to
guide their decision making,
to make them feel like they're in some type of group,
right?
That they have support in, and they're just used to go off and fight for
and die
either a prince or I guess a sultan in Erdogan's case at this point. I think at this point Erdogan considers himself a sultan, right?
Pseudo sultan.
A pseudo sultan. Yeah, that guy's all right.
Piece of shit. All right. Well,
all right. That was an explosive episode.
Yep. So we've got some plugging to do, right, Henry?
Oh yeah. So thank you for reminding me. So this is probably the third or fourth time we've done this, but this time I swear we're really trying to do this right. So we're back on Patreon. We are setting up we've already set up a Slack for Patreon, and it's actually really fun. We're putting people basically we're just talking on Slack and talking about the show, just anything in politics,
ideas, fun stuff,
networking.
Yep.
We're trying to build the Slack up. So Patreon will send you an invite, just $1 a month for that. And then there's 3 other tiers. There's a $3 and a $5 tier as well. Whatever you want. We just obviously love the fact that you listen in the first place. And then the other thing, we'll be releasing new content on Patreon. Again, I sound like a broken record, but we are actually in the process of building this new content out. And
it's gonna be cool.
It's gonna be cool. It's gonna be. If you're interested in the stuff that we talk about, then I'm assuming, if you're interested in the stuff that we talk about, then you're gonna like it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we're working on some other podcasts that I guess you can either say supplement bro history or that are entirely. We're working on some other projects. I'll just put it that way. So we'll be putting that on Patreon at the very least at the beginning when we're releasing these, and then just remember to rate and review the podcast if you're listening on iTunes. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that stuff. That helps the YouTube channel grow. To help the YouTube channel grow, we want to try to grow that too. And then, is there anything else that we need to plug in?
Not today, but looking forward to chatting with you on Slack.
All right, everyone.
Peace.